Welcome to Your Family Dog, a podcast dedicated to helping families love living with dogs. Here are your hosts, Julie Fudge Smith and Colleen Pelar.
Hello and welcome to Your Family Dog. I'm Julie Fudge Smith and I'm here, of course, with Colleen Pelar. But today we have a special guest, Dr. Wendy McIlroy. She's a veterinarian. But she's not here to talk to us about vet stuff. She's here to talk to us about search and rescue. Now, Wendy practiced as an equine veterinarian in Pennsylvania, Ohio, and Michigan. And she worked as a marine mammal stranding coordinator in, I can't even pronounce this, Kauai. Good. And she's now retired in Oregon. She's had dogs all her life, and she has now started to do scent work and search and rescue with her dogs. So we invited her on to talk about the first in our series of dog sports, basically scent work, and how you can get into something a little bit more serious if you're interested in search and rescue. So Wendy, can you tell us how you got interested in this kind of thing?
Well, it actually happened when I was in Kauai, and and right after I moved there, we literally had 40 days and 40 nights of rain, and there was a dam burst, and some people died, and there was an article about the canine search team, and I thought, well, that's really cool, and I was looking at getting a puppy anyway, and so I contacted them and kind of went from there. So.
That's a big impetus to start it. Like, wow.
So my question is did you get the dog with search and rescue in mind? Is there a reason why you chose a particular dog, or did you just kind of hope that this cute little puppy you were getting would work out?
Well, it was kind of more that I hoped that the cute little puppy I was getting would work out, because I really didn't know enough about search and rescue at the time, and fortunately she did. But, it could have just as easily been, oh, well, that doesn't work, and so we'll go to plan B. But there are ways to test a dog and to know whether it's going to be. But in my case, I just kind of lucked into it.
So. Okay.
Are there breeds that are more likely to be good for search and rescue versus ones that are less?
Yeah, there are. It's not so much the breed. So there are plenty of mixed breed dogs that come out of shelters that make great search dogs. But there are certain aspects to the search dog which are more prevalent in certain breeds. So, for example, the hunting, sporting, herding breeds are very used to working with people. And so they are bred for working with people. They're more used to, for example, if you have a retriever type dog, and I have labs, if you have a retriever type dog, they tend to go out and get something and bring it to you, or go out and say, hey, look at this, and come back and get mom. And whereas you might get a husky, which a husky is a wonderful dog, and they're going to find the stuff, but they might go, hey, look at that, and then keep going. And, so it's nice to have a dog that is a little more people focused. And so it's not so much the breed, it's the attitude of the dog, and of course the drive of the dog. And then some of it is physical as well. The brachycephalic breeds, they just don't have a lot of nose space.
True. They don't have a lot of head space either when you kind of look at that.
And so that makes it a little harder. And plus, they often have breathing issues, which isn't good if you have to work them for long periods of time outside in the heat.
Mm-hmm. So what about dogs? I think when people think of search and rescue, you always think of the movies and the bloodhounds baying and tracking people through the woods. So are the coon hounds and the tick hounds and the bloodhounds and the beagles and all those hounds, are they particularly well disposed towards this?
They're really good as tracking dogs, tracking and trailing dogs. They tend to use their noses to really go after whatever the scent is. But again, with a bloodhound, you're usually better to have the bloodhound on lead, because they will just they'll be in the next county, and it's like, I guess they found somebody, but then you have to figure out the dog. So
then you have to use the search and rescue lab to find the search and rescue bloodhound,
exactly.
Right?
Yeah. So there are pros and cons. I mean, there's I have some friends who run bloodhounds, and they're really, really good dogs. There's absolutely no question. Some of it's just your personal preference and what type of searching you're doing, whether you're doing off lead, air scent or trailing, which are they're different. There's just a different way approach working with your dog. So
could you talk about those two different kinds? Because I can kind of imagine what those are, but I don't really have a good definition of them.
Sure. Okay. The trailing dog, and we use trailing versus tracking in search and rescue, and there is a little bit of a difference. Tracking dog tends to go footstep to footstep, and they are actually sniffing a lot more of the immediate breakdown of vegetation and things like that, the damage to the environment, versus the trailing dogs which actually do both, have a mixture. But the trailing dogs actually are given a scent article from the person they're looking for, and then they will follow that scent. Now, if the wind's been blowing and there's been traffic and a bunch of other things, and the sun is shining and there's shady areas and all these other things that change where the scent is, the scent might not be right where the person walked. The scent might be 50 feet over to the east because there's been a west wind, and so the dog is following where the scent of the person, where the bacteria, which is breaking down everything that comes off the person, whether it's skin rafts or every time you breathe, you have stuff come out of your lungs, and that all is part of the whole picture that the dog finds. And it's very distinctive for an individual person.
So how do you decide if you're training a dog to track or trail? Is that based on you as the trainer and what you're good at training, or the dog showing a gift in one direction or the other?
It's usually more, I mean, some people, if your dog has no preference, then you choose what you want your dog to do. But if you have a dog that tends to put his nose down to the ground, you're probably going to want to use that as a trailing dog versus the dog that's up sniffing the air. That's going to be the air scent dog. And the air scent dogs, as opposed to the trailing dogs, do not look for a particular person. They find anybody out there. So this is the dogs you use out in the wilderness. And they just go out and they cover a pattern of maybe 150 acres. And just sweep back and forth scent from the cone. There's basically a scent cone coming in on the air that they work to get to the person. So those dogs work off lead generally, unless they're working sometimes in the city. They'll work them on lead, but they work much more efficiently off lead, and they can cover a lot of ground that people just can't.
Oh, that's really interesting. So what I was thinking, how can you tell if this would be a good thing for your dog? It comes to mind, my husband, his childhood dog, Penny, loved tennis balls. Like, okay, what dog in most, retrievers doesn't? She was a little Cocker Spaniel, and she adored tennis balls. And it didn't matter where the tennis ball was, she was going to find it. And I remember one story that they loved to tell about Penny is when they went to his grandparents' house, and they were downstairs in the basement where they had a rec room, and Penny just was fussing and fussing and fussing over this filing cabinet. And they're like, Penny, leave it alone, leave it alone. And she wouldn't leave it alone. They opened it up, and in the back of the filing cabinet was a tennis ball that had probably been there for, 40 years, and she found it. And so my feeling was, wow, that was probably a dog that would have been really good for scent work. Is that one of the things that you're looking for?
Absolutely. And in fact, when I got Mora, who's my current working dog, as a puppy, that's one of the things he used to do is hide a tennis ball in the backyard. And then and you just watch her naturally doing a pattern, checking everywhere, and just teaching herself. And the best way to teach a dog is to get them to teach themselves. I mean, because they really want to do it, and it's not like you do this now, especially since with search work, as opposed to like obedience or something like that, or agility, where they have to pay attention to where you want them to go. This is just the opposite. You want them to have enough self-confidence to go do it themselves, and then and let you know. So you have to have a dog that's got that confidence, and it's a great way to teach them is just to hide their favorite toy,
What level of criteria do you start with? So if one of our listeners wanted to hide something how do we give the guidelines that it's not hidden too hard? Or
Well, first it has to be their favorite toy. I mean, it has to be something they enjoy, because if it's just something they're not that into, they're just like, oh, well, it's gone. So if they have a favorite tug toy or chewy, or so what you do with a dog that to just get them started with that stuff is you find what their fun thing is, and you play fetch with it. So you toss it out, they go get it, and then you start tossing it maybe into some tall grass. So they know where it is, but it takes them a little bit longer to do it, and you just build it up from there until basically you toss it out, and they can't see where you tossed it, and they have to search an entire area to find it. And you kind of will know, because I mean, if they say, oh well, that was too hard, then they'll say, oh, maybe I pushed that a little hard. But
so it seems
it's
to
all
me
fun.
You could do that inside as well, couldn't you, Wendy?
Absolutely. It could be. Exactly. You could hide it like behind around the corner of a couch or something like that, where they have to find it in the living room somewhere. Yeah.
Okay. So that would be one fun game you could do to get it started. And it's also the thing that I think Colleen and I both really like about that is that requires some mental stimulation for your dog. So that not only are you got some physical activity, you've got some mental stimulation, and dogs need that kind of thing. So I think you're going to find that this would be great for mental exercise, which is going to help to wear your dog out, especially your over-energetic dog. So are there any other games that you would recommend people could play that would require some scent stuff?
Yeah, if let's say you have a dog that is that likes to put its nose down, or even it doesn't, you can do a little bit of trailing work too. And so what you can do with a trail or a track is we use these red felt squares. And what we do with the squares is we stick them in your shirt or whatever, and you have a bunch of them, and you walk and you start with a puppy. You walk a couple paces, put one down, walk a couple paces, put one down, and you do it in a straight line. And each one has a little nugget of one of their favorite treats, preferably a moist treat, because if they're moving along, you don't want them to choke on something dry. And then they learn to put their nose down, and the trail trains the dog to follow a trail. And that's how we actually teach trailing. And that's also a fun thing you can do with your dog, and you can do it with your own scent. It doesn't even have to be somebody else. Just because it's something that stimulates the dog, they learn to follow a trail, and eventually you spread out how often they get the little rags. And then at the end of the trail, there won't be a person there, especially if you lay it. You might have a big pile of treats.
Okay.
Or in Maura's case, because her favorite thing is a tennis ball, her last little red square had a tennis ball sitting on top of it. So she followed the trail to her ball. So that's another way to sort of variation of the same game that is basically the foundation for how we start dogs in search and rescue that you can use just as a fun game with your dogs.
That's
and
very
we use the red. We use the red because they're red-green colorblind, which means you can put this out on grass, and the dog is going to have a hard time seeing it.
Oh,
because they can't see if it basically the green and the red both look brown to the dog, but you can see it, so you can know what the dog's doing. So that's why we use red.
Can I just ask a question about that, just from the perspective of trying it? So we'd have like 10 red pieces of felt, and I've tucked them into my collar somewhere, so I have easy access to them, and they smell a little bit like me. And so as I pull one out, I just put one little piece of treat in it, and I drop it on the ground.
You actually put it right where you're going to walk, so you're walking directly over it.
Okay.
So they are actually following your scent to get to the scent, and every time that they get to a square, that's concentrated amount of your scent.
Right.
Which is how we so even when you spread it out, so maybe they're 10 paces, like 50 feet apart or something like that, if you're really getting serious with the game. The dog is like, it goes along, smell, and maybe they're not on the footstep anymore. They might be over here, and then they get the smell of the next scent article, and they go, oh, there it is, and they get rewarded by smelling the person's scent that they are looking for.
Very cool. That could be a really fun game.
It's a fun game. It's fun. It is fun. It is fun. And then you can mix it up by aging it, or having different people, or having it go through some contamination. So you have somebody cross over the track, and so that they're still following the same person. And you can play around with it a lot. I mean, that's basically what we do when we train.
Contamination just brought up another question. So I laid out my trail. My dog found the whole trail. Now I pick up my felt squares. Do I need to do anything to them before I would use them again? Do they need to be washed? Do they need to be...
Only if they're grubby. Truthfully, the dog will pick up the scent of the last person to touch it. So even if you give them to somebody else and they stick it in their shirt, if they don't mind your scent on them, the fact that it's brown, that's a whole different people. They're all
That's right.
For you, it might be an issue, but for the dog, they will then take the person who is the freshest scent. Yeah.
Okay, so my question is, how did you prevent Moira from just dashing to the tennis ball?
Because it was at the end. Because she didn't know where the tennis ball was unless she followed the trail.
Oh, okay. So the tennis ball was not in sight. Right, so when she was doing this trail, it wasn't as if you had 4 or 5 little squares within 10 feet and the tennis ball was at the end.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Exactly.
All right. So you could, if you wanted to just use treats, you could make it very short for a dog that's got a short...
Absolutely. And then you can still, if you want to do the ball or the tug toy or whatever at the end, then once you get to the end, because we usually do this on lead. You can do it off lead, but we usually do this on lead. But it doesn't really matter. It's just because we are training them to get used to the harness and get used to pulling on the harness and the feel of the person and all that kind of stuff. But you can very easily do it off lead. But then you can finish when they get to the end. Then you can give them another reward as well. So
okay. So is there a special? What can it be? It sounds like you don't need a whole lot of equipment except some red felt squares, and Joanne has those on sale most of the time. But you talked about a harness. So if somebody
exactly where I got mine.
Joanne Fabrics, yes.
Buy the stuff, cut it up in pieces. Yep.
That's right. For the non-seamstress, you can do this. So
if you have scissors, you can do this.
That's right.
That's the level of entry I like to have.
Yes.
Honestly, let's just start really low.
So, I mean, it could be a project for your kindergartner who's learning to cut, right? Cut these squares up for mommy.
Exactly. Cut these up with your little rounded scissors. Yeah.
Right. It just doesn't.
They might be funky shapes, but the dog doesn't care.
That's right. That's right. I like the idea of the red-green color blindness. I wouldn't have thought of that because when you were saying that, I'm thinking, well, shoot, why don't I just use Brad's old socks, but from the laundry.
And you can do that too, but then there may be the visual component. And with some dogs, visual matters more than others. Obviously, the herding breeds are a little more inclined to be looking, right, whereas the hunting breeds are more inclined to be using their noses. So,
okay. Those are all good. So my other question is we're talking mostly about fairly hardy dogs who can handle being outside. So I'm not thinking that you have a whole lot of search and rescue Bichon Frises or Chihuahuas or.
It's not that they can't. I mean, some of the work we do, if you think about doing human remains detection, which I also do with Mora, that's exactly the same as nose work. They're just sniffing for different stuff. And it's often in much smaller areas. You're not necessarily covering 5 acres out in the woods,
right?
To find a body. It might be you get called because somebody disappeared, and there's the police call you in because they suspect that they might have stuck the person somewhere in their house, or something. So we're doing something like that. Obviously, there's a bunch of other scenarios too, but. If you're doing something like that, you very well could use a smaller dog. And it's again, it's not so much the breed, it's the attitude of the dog. And they do have to be fit, but you can have a fit Chihuahua. I've seen a lot of them I'll be out on a hike, 5 miles up the trail, and this little sucker's this big, but he's going.
That's right.
So it doesn't necessarily mean that being small doesn't mean they can't get the job done. So
okay, I have 2 non-related questions, and you can answer them in any order you want. How do you get into human remains detection? That's got to be a very specialized part of search and rescue. That's because I don't think there's a whole lot of rescue going on there. That's more search.
That's pretty much just the search part. Yeah.
So do you have to train? Do you train to cadavers?
We train to placenta. So yeah, you find somebody who's willing to donate a placenta. Sometimes you can get it sometimes the hospitals will just have them because the people released them or whatever. And they're used to doing that for the police dogs. And as long as you're working, at least here in Oregon, and I think it's in most states, you're usually working under the auspices of your sheriff's department.
Okay.
And there's no legal issue with having placenta.
I heard a long time ago, I have no idea if this is true or not, that some train to teeth as well, so that dentists. I feel like I heard a dentist kept.
Some people do teeth. Truthfully, it doesn't matter because you're not training to a specific body part at all. You're training to human decomposition, and it doesn't matter what part of the body is decomposing. The dog smells it the same way.
Okay.
So some people play a game of, I have to put this out here and this out here. What's more important is they get used to the age. So you have different levels of decomposition. And that so you try to stagger when you take it out of the freezer. So you have different ages so that they can get used to the different ages of decomposition.
Well, which age is easier? Like, do we start with very decomposed because that's a stronger odor and then work down to just a little, or to go the reverse way?
It doesn't see. I don't know that it actually matters. I think it's just a matter of whether when you introduce the dog to it that they're not just totally repelled by it, because some are. And so you can find out really fast. It's like when you introduce your dog and the dog goes, "Oh no, I'm not doing that." Then it's like,
I'm wondering if our listeners are doing that right now. No. We're talking about body parts and they're like,
yeah. Sorry, and I apologize to your listeners. Sorry about that. But, it's an important thing. If there's a loved one is missing,
yes,
it's a very
important
closure.
It's a really important job, and it's amazing that dogs do it, and fascinating how it's trained. So
well, but think about how many times I don't know. My dogs have rolled in dead weasel and kind of like it was perfume. So, but I'm imagining that decomposing weasel smells different than decomposing people.
Yes, and for a while they thought it would be a great idea to train on pigs. But that's different too. A dog absolutely knows the difference. We don't.
Okay.
I mean, that's why they haven't yet been able to make a machine to do human remains detection, because it's such a complex package of all of the different volatiles that the dogs are smelling, and we don't really know what they are to be able to do what a dog does. So it's really, it is pretty cool what the dogs can do.
Yeah. And so humbling that we walk around not even knowing anything about it, like all these scents and things in our environment. We're just oblivious.
Yeah, what I've heard before, and I kind of like the analogy, is it's like when we go into the kitchen and we smell, it smells like stew. And the dog's like, yeah, I smell peas, onions, carrots. They dissect out all the different smells. And we are simply not capable of doing that. So
I have to say I've completely forgotten my second question. So I'm going to go to another one, which is: are there like scent clubs or organizations that people can take a look at? Are there websites for any of these things that we could post on the show notes?
They're probably. I don't know that there's. I don't know what kind of. I'm sure that if you look in YouTube, there's some stuff. I don't know for sure. Certainly, there's plenty of stuff on. There's plenty of stuff on AKC tracking, and there's plenty of stuff on nose work. Nose work is, I don't know if it's as popular where you are, but boy, out here it is a hot game.
It is definitely growing in our area.
Yeah. So I'm sure you find lots of nose work, and nose work is trained exactly the same as human remains. There's just really not a lot of different. You're training the alert. You're training them to find a specific odor. It's just in our case, it happens to be dead person.
You talked earlier about having a human-centered animal that that the husky may find the thing, but then he's taking off for the next thing. But to have a dog so I wondered if you could address a little bit the human-dog bond that happens in search and rescue. And so will that enhance a family dog's relationship to his owners? What is it that you find happens? What are some of the positive benefits that happen between you and your dog by being involved in this activity?
Well, you're spending a lot of time together. Is a lot of it. But they know that whatever they're doing with you is going to be fun. It's going to have something fun at the end. And even when we're out on an actual mission, the dog doesn't know that it's any different. It's still just the game to the dog. So you're basically just spending a lot of time playing with your dog. And they think that's great. How could that be bad? So
how do you successfully end a day when the search itself was unsuccessful? So if you are looking for a person who's lost or a body, and we don't succeed on that, but we need the dog to say, "Yay, you worked hard." What do you do?
I usually just finish up, just like for example, we were actually on, I'll give you an example, it's probably easier. We were on a mission maybe a couple months ago, I guess. And Maura was working really hard, following this person's trail across a field. We were just getting up towards a road, and we heard the radio call that the person had been found, was okay, was actually exactly in the direction we were going. My dog was on trail. When we are doing these technicals that I told you about with all of the little squares on them, they have a reward at the end and not necessarily a person. We just quit working the dog, and I pulled out the tennis ball and played with her. And that was the end of it. And then we just called for someone to pick us up at the road and take us back to Sarbase.
So the whole training ends with a fun game of tennis ball, so that there's a definite end to this game. So you can always pull that out, even if the end game is you don't find the person. We end it because we've trained to this ending.
And we all carry whatever it is. If our dog is a tug toy dog, then they pull out the tug toy to play with the dog. If they're a ball dog, pull out the ball. And it doesn't. And you have to be careful with the ball, because if you're in an urban environment, you don't want the ball to end up in the street and your dog gets injured. So I usually hand her the ball, and she just likes possessing it. She's just like, okay, I've got the ball. This is good. And then we can play when we're in a safer place.
Right. Well, I find with retrievers, there starts to be this sort of Zen moment when they're holding something. And so it's just like, I feel so much better now that I have something in my mouth. So yeah, I could see that definitely with a lab. So is there anything else that you would want people to know about search and rescue or nose work that would be something that might encourage them to give it a try? Or it doesn't sound to me like it's got a whole lot of equipment involved, so it doesn't sound like it's an expensive sport to get involved in. And you did say something about a harness. Is there a special harness if you get further along that your dog has to wear?
Yes, because we when we're doing air scent, we usually put a vest on the dog and a bell, so that they can be heard, because they might be far away from the owner, and you want to make sure that they can be seen, they can be recognized as a search dog. But the trailing dogs, you want to have a trailing harness where they can have the pull, and I should have pulled out one of Maura's, where they can pull without doing this, because they are going to be pulling, so you're not going to put the easy walker on and latch it in front, keeping the dog from pulling. In this case, you want the dog to, they don't necessarily pull hard, but you want them to have that contact. It's sort of more like riding a horse, and you have contact on the bit, so that the horse or the dog knows you're there. And in fact, one of my teammates in search and rescue, is working a deaf dog on trailing. And so her only communication, she can't say good girl or, anything like that. Her only communication is through the lead.
Oh, so, okay. Yeah. Well, that's very interesting.
So the harness is important. It has to be comfortable. They have to be able to put a little bit of pressure into it without it doing anything to obstruct their airway or anything like that.
Well, thank you, Wendy. Is there anything else that you would like to ask Colleen for what we've done today?
I think you've given us some really good tips for people to just play something simple with their dog, and then if that whets their appetite, then they can go and learn more. So I really appreciate you sharing and answering all my questions of like, oh, that's very interesting. How do you do that? 'Cause that's the part I really love, is learning something new.
Yeah, and I love the scent trail one with the red squares, that you create a trail that you can have for your dog. Is there any kind of a link to that game that we could put on the website, Wendy?
I don't know. Johnny Joyce is the one who is my master trainer that I work with, is the one who started doing this particular method, specifically with the red squares because of the color blindness. And I don't know that she has anything up, but I could see, and if she does, I could send a link.
That'd be great.
That'd be great. That would be great. And then, of course, just playing the hide your favorite toy game.
That's always
which,
the best.
We've talked about.
Yeah.
That's right. And if nothing else, you can always stuff a really tasty Kong and hide
which
that.
is good for the dogs who
So,
don't have a favorite toy.
Or
That's the next question people will say. Well, he doesn't really like his toys. Well, okay.
And Lonnie, my older girl, she might be a lab, but she did not get the tennis ball gene, and she is not into toys. She never has been. Her reward has always been food. So you have to train the dog you've got, not the train you.
Yeah.
Not whatever
right.
it says in the book.
All right. Well, thank you, Wendy. It's been delightful talking with you.
Thank you, Wendy.
And we'll
end with the
book. All right, Colleen, I'll see you next week.
See you next week.
Thanks for listening to Your Family Dog. Got questions? Interesting ideas? Colleen and Julie would love to hear them. Call 614-349-1661 or visit www.yourfamilydogpodcast.com to share your thoughts.